What do you get when you mix 1 part philosophy, 1 part politics, and cut it with a healthy shot of history?
You get the perfect podcast cocktail. Thank you for listening.
Now sit back, open your drinks, and open your minds. This is Six Pack Philosophy.
Welcome to Six Pack Philosophy with Mike and John. I'm Anastasia, and this week we're discussing the Electoral College because of the general division over it, and in response to a lot of the feedback that we got when we made a post about it on our social media.
That was a fun post.
It was interesting. But before we get started, what are we drinking, guys?
We are drinking Hefe-Weissbier.
From the Paulaner Munich Brewery in Munich, Germany.
Yes.
This is a Hefe-Weissbier, and what's the ABV on this? Do you have that?
Yes, it is 5.5.
5.5%. Let's see what we got here. Another one of these German beers.
Oh, I popped it and just immediately smelled the banana.
Oh, I like
That's going to be good. Oh boy. It almost smells like banana pudding. Or, banana pudding.
Oh, that's interesting.
Banana bread, that's what I'm thinking.
All right, so we are talking about the Electoral College, our, well, let's just call it what it is, our archaic system of selecting the president that we have.
And the only office that we elect this way.
The only one. So let's talk about the Electoral College a little bit. The Electoral College, it was a compromise position by the Founding Fathers when they came up with this. Alexander Hamilton and James Madison.
So you're saying nobody was happy with it then either?
I'm saying that,
yes.
Yeah. Alexander Hamilton and James Madison laid out these plans in the Federalist Papers where it was a way of compromising between the big state plan and the little state plan. Much like the Great Compromise came through and said the House of Representatives is determined by population and the Senate will be 2 representatives, equal representation in every state. The Electoral College uses that same kind of math. What they do is they go through and they look at the states. And today there's 538 electoral votes. It's made up of 435 votes in the House of Representatives, 100 votes in the Senate, and the 3 votes that were amended with the addition of the District of Columbia to voting rights in the 1960s. So these 538 electoral votes takes population into consideration. It takes the equality of the states with the Senate into consideration. And it figures out this bizarre math system where the winning candidate has to win a majority of electoral votes. So the magic number today is 270. Right? Here's the problem. 538 is an even number.
Yeah.
Right.
Divided by 2 is 269, right?
Right.
Which means that theoretically, at least, it would be possible for a tie to happen. We'll talk about what happens in that effect a little bit later on. But this system is bizarre because in all but 2 states, it's a winner-take-all system. All you have to win is 50.1% of the votes, and you get all of that state's electoral votes.
Right.
What's the problem with that?
Go ahead.
Well, what it seems to say is that in a state with 201,000 people, that if 101,000 people think Bob should be the president, that George gets absolutely no representation from that state. He gets 201,000 people's votes worth of.
Not exactly democratic, right?
Yeah.
Not exactly a democratic system because of the winner take all.
I would argue it's a purely democratic system, and it's a problem. But
no, I don't think it is a democratic system at all. If it was a democratic system, it would be a popular vote.
Well, it's democratic state by state. It's not democratic nationally.
Yeah, because in a nation of 201,000 people, if 101,000, it's not. Yeah, it's perfect. It's democratic on a state scale.
Agreed. But not democratic at all on a national scale.
Which is the scale in which the
president is elected, which is bizarre, and it allows for a situation that is difficult to happen, but it has happened 4 times in our history, where a minority candidate wins the presidency. The guy that gets the least amount of popular votes can actually win the presidency with a majority of popular votes. Now, 4 times. I was reading somewhere the percentages. That's 5% of our elections.
Right.
Uncommon, but not unheard of.
Yeah, 5% of our elections. And the example that I saw, and I've forgotten where I saw it, but somebody said, what popular sport would you accept where 5% of the time the losing team won the game?
Yeah.
That's pretty high numbers, really, when you start looking at it like that.
Sounds like Quidditch.
I don't even know what the hell that is. So
Our listeners know.
Why have our listeners know?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not a listener. So
Most of our listeners know.
okay. So why did we have this system besides just the idea of, trying to reach a compromise between population and states? This was actually developed because of the difficulty in communicating in the early Republic period. It was very difficult in the early Republic period to send a message. How did you do it? You wrote it down.
Put it on a horse.
Sent it by horseback, right? Something that could take months and months and months. The Electoral College was a way to get around this. And the thought originally was that the electors would meet in Washington, D.C., where the events of the day were happening, and those electors would then be more knowledgeable than the people back home.
Right.
So
Yeah.
if something happened that the people in Virginia weren't aware of, they would know about it in Washington, D.C., and they could be there to kind of tame democracy.
Well, and not just because of the difficulty in disseminating information to the masses, but also because, like you said, it took months to send the letter across. Something might have changed from the time the letter was sent to the time it was delivered.
That's true.
And at that point, you can have all the information up to that point, and boom, here's the vote.
You could have a situation like 1824 when there were 4 major candidates and William H. Crawford had a stroke after the election day.
Yeah.
Do you want to cast your vote for somebody that's paralyzed?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. By the way, he still came in third in that
Nice.
election.
I would hate to be the fourth one.
It was Henry Clay was the 4th place candidate in 24. Cost Andrew Jackson the election. But you start seeing these systems, and it was done intentionally with the intent of taming democracy, of being able to stop a runaway democracy. Our founders were not a fan of democracy.
Yeah, they were afraid of
intentionally-
the tyranny of the majority.
That's right. They intentionally created a system that didn't have that.
See, do we have direct writing saying that this was to curtail democracy? Because I understand the curtail democracy arguments with the House and the Senate. That makes perfect sense to me. And I understand the communication issues with the electors and what that was meant to address. But do we have direct evidence that the electors were because of the democracy, or did they handle that with the House and Senate and this was because of other reasons?
Well, we do to an extent. We have a situation where Alexander Hamilton said that the fact that the elector, he didn't use the word electoral college because that's a 19th century
Right,
thing.
right.
But he said in the Federalist Papers that because the electors would be elected every 4 years, separate from your legislators, they wouldn't be held to the whims of the people. They wouldn't be
Because they weren't
swayed-
professionals.
Yeah, they wouldn't be swayed by the need of this because they don't have a long term. They're being elected one time for one event, and that gave them a freedom to vote, the right way and not be taken by the public whim.
So, Mike, I want to see if you've got some information here because I had some trouble finding this whenever I looked it up. When the party or when the country started initially, we didn't have political parties. So the way it is today, I know they developed very quickly.
After the first election.
Well, and so when this was put into place, the idea was that, or the hope, at least according to Washington, was that we wouldn't have political parties.
Yeah.
So I have to think that they had some sort of mechanism that they imagined this happening by, because the way it happens now is each party chooses their electors. So how was it intended to happen before?
That's not entirely true.
Yeah, that's not entirely true. The way it was designed, and it's given a lot of freedom. the states are. The idea was that the states would be able to determine how those electors were put out. As a result of that, we do have some differing situations. That's why we have 2 states that apportion them by congressional district instead of winner take all. Other 48 states all do it winner take all. That's why we have situations like in 2000 in Florida, where the Secretary of State could go through, certify the election, and the court could then assign the electors. It's up to the states to do it. Theoretically, in all reality, if a state wanted to, a state could go through and say that the legislature picks the electors, and the state legislature could certify an election in opposition to the will of the people, if that's the way the state chose to do it.
Well, and I would go even kind of one step further with that and say, even in states like Texas, where the parties generally pick the electors, there's even provisions there past parties. You can't completely depend on parties because you have independent candidates who are on the ballot, and in those cases, for instance,
they have to get their own electors.
Yeah, they have to pick their own electors. But so it's not even entirely true, I don't think, in any state that it's a pure party system.
And now I've forgotten how many states, 20-something states, I think it was 28 states have a law in place about faithless electors, where they can remove you for voting against it.
Now they can't discount your vote, but you're liable for some civil penalties. Is that correct?
There are states that if you say your intent is to vote against the will of the people, they can remove you and replace you with another elector.
Yeah, because you have to
vote,
sign.
Once you vote, they cannot change your vote, but there can be civil penalty. Yes. But I found it interesting that today, that if I was an elector and I said I just can't vote for the nominee that we have, I just can't do it because something came out, the state legislature could forcibly remove me, which is anathema to the idea of the Electoral College. Here's some other issues with the Electoral College. The math is very skewed, and this is something that's kind of tough for us to hear, because I've always thought of the Electoral College as favoring the big states. It means that they're going to campaign in Texas and Ohio and New York and Florida and all this. But you get looking at the facts, and I wonder if that's true. Because the way they apportion these is every state is required to have three electors.
Right.
You get 2 for your Senate, and you get at least 1 for the House.
You can have a population of 1.
Yeah. So here's what they do is they give every state 3 electors. Then they figure out the apportionment of the other. Total of 435 there in the House, 538 total. And they reapportion. As a result, your small states actually have a higher value per vote than your large states. I was reading a vote in Vermont. 1 vote in Vermont is equal to 4 votes in Texas because of the way this apportionment. It's California gets hit dramatically. It gets hit the hardest of any state. While it's got the most electoral votes, if we went by strictly population, California would have many more electoral votes than it has today. So, you wonder about that. You wonder about the advantages of that. Because while it's not an advantage in the immediate math, where it becomes an advantage is in the situation of a tie, where you run into this problem. Let's say you're a strong third party. You're a Ross Perot, a really strong third party candidate, and you're strong in the heartland. You're strong, up in the Midwest all the way down. You're strong in the red states, basically, the middle of the country. You don't get enough to come in first or second. Nobody wins a majority. You're third place. Now, what happens if nobody wins a majority of votes in the votes for the presidency? Anybody know?
It goes to the House.
A majority of votes, or a majority of
electoral votes.
Electorals. Okay. It goes to the House.
Yeah, it goes to the House. According to the 12th Amendment, it goes to the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives determines who is going to be the president. Here's the problem. All of a sudden, it's not based on population anymore, because in the House of Representatives, every state gets 1 vote.
Right.
Now California is not more valuable than your smaller states.
Right.
And all of a sudden, that third-party candidate that was in third place down there, all of a sudden, he carries Minnesota, he carries Wyoming, he carries Missouri, some of these smaller states out there, and all of a sudden you have this third-party candidate that leaps forward and takes the presidency. It would be difficult to happen, but you can see where mathematically it could. It has once, by the way, in 1824, when Andrew Jackson won the popular vote, but he didn't get 50%. He got 49 point something percent of the vote. And the deal was made. It ended up being Andrew Jackson, John Quincy Adams, and Henry Clay. Henry Clay had and William H. Crawford, who had a stroke. And then you ended up with going to the House of Representatives, and because the population didn't matter anymore, John Quincy Adams eclipsed him and became president. This can happen, and that's the problem with the math in the Electoral College.
So I have been really hard pressed to buy into the Electoral College, but I do want to talk about a group who has, and I want to kind of respond to some of the points they made. Prager University, which I will say, they've put out some things I agree with, but I need to say before we start, they're not a university. They have some smart people that work for them, but they are a YouTube channel. That is what Prager University is. We could rename the show Philosophy University, and we would be no more credentialed than they are. Just throw that out there.
I thought they put out a good explanation of the Electoral College.
Yes.
But then they put out another video about why it was important or something like that. That was grossly biased.
Yeah, so a couple points that they point out. First of all, they talk about the tyranny of the majority and how some very small states would get like no representation in a purely democratic system. They'd just be completely ignored and nothing, they wouldn't have any say in the process of their own president. First of all, what divides one state from another is mostly, unless you're talking about states far across the map from each other, is mostly local state laws. I saw a really interesting picture recently. It was a picture of a coin from a land management survey, and it had 4 states. I think Colorado was one of them, and there were square states, and it was the apex of where those states crossed. And it was talking about the marijuana laws in each of them. One of them was fully legalized. One of them was legalized for medicinal use. One was legalized for medicinal, but you could only get it from the government, but you could get it mail-ordered. And one was not legal at all. And it was talking about if you live on this apex, you can jump from one place to another, and your laws completely change from one place to another. So that's the main difference from one state to another. As far as what crops grow and all this, it doesn't vary much between neighboring states. So she talked about the need for state representation. And I'm sorry, I live on a quarter-acre little spot of land. And on the, Midwestern side is the house with all the people in it. And all the dirt on the Mid-Eastern side is feeling very left out, that they don't get any say in what's for dinner from day to day. And in fact, the south of my property gets absolutely no say in decisions made day to day. And I'm sorry, the dirt doesn't care. It's the people in the house that make decisions from day to day.
Well, and I think that's a ridiculous analogy. However, my whole thing as far as, the small states don't get a say with a purely democratic election. We have one office that we elect throughout the entire United States. And I don't actually see a problem with electing that one with every single individual having one vote to cast, and not separating it based on state lines.
Why do you think it's ridiculous when we talk about that there are no people living in the east side of my property, and why it doesn't get a say? Why is that?
Well, because the dirt doesn't want to eat dinner.
I agree. And when we talk about population by the same split, and we talk about a state with 100 people next to a state with 10,000 people, why should those 100 people get a boost in their voice because they live on the side of the line with 100 people on it? Why?
And I think that is a much better way to phrase that, is what I'm saying. I just don't think that the analogy that you used was effective.
I think the tyranny of the majority is a real thing. I think you could have a situation where where one group of people can alienate another and make life very difficult for another group. You've got Thomas Jefferson talking about Congress said surely 435 people can be as tyrannical as one, but that's the tyranny of the majority. I think it can happen. I think mathematically right now it couldn't, because our urban population is still not enough to sway that. You cannot win an election right now through the Electoral College by carrying New York, California, Chicago, Houston, four biggest cities in the country. You can't do it. But
why would I trade the tyranny of 300,000 people living a mile away for the tyranny of 300 people living 1,000 miles away?
Well, your numbers are greatly skewed. You're correct. If you're talking about numbers that far apart, you've got something different. But when you start talking about a situation where you have small majorities that can now be small urban majorities that could be foisting things on a rural minority that have different expectations, they have different beliefs. I'm sorry, life in Montana is a lot different from life in California. It just is. And
life in Northern California is a lot different than in Southern California.
I agree, which is why California should be split up.
Well,
but
yeah.
The idea of protecting the authority of the states is something that's inherent in our Constitution, something that's always been there.
And I'm fine with that. I agree 100%. I'm with you, Mike. But we haven't done that. We've just found this weird...
Oh, I agree. The system is greatly flawed. I don't think the Electoral College in itself is a bad thing. I think the way we do... I think winner take all is a bad thing.
Yeah. Well,
if we apportioned it through congressional districts, you've got a little different system.
If it was population based, I wouldn't be making this argument. If it was population based, +2 and the 2 were determined by the state government in some manner, I would say that's a system that makes sense. Now we've involved the state governments, the ones making the laws, and I'd be with you, but that's not what we did. We made it a popular vote, and some votes are worth more than others. And to that I say, why?
It's bizarre. It's bizarre because... the Supreme Court has made a ruling, one person, one vote, where they went through and said that we could not draw our congressional districts in a manner that they weren't personably the same size.
Right.
They've got to be very close. And yet our states are not that way.
Right.
And the Electoral College is not one person. I'm sorry, but if a Vermonter's vote is worth 4 times as much as a Texan's vote, that says something. Here's the problem I have with the Electoral College. It's not even the fact that it protects states, which I think it does to an extent. It's the fact that it protects 4 states. Under the current system, if you can look at the last 2 months of campaigns over the last 20 years, where do they spend their time? They spend their time in Virginia, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Florida.
Yeah.
Those 4 states are what decide our elections because of the Electoral College. Yes, New York is bigger. Yes, California is bigger. Yes, Texas is bigger. But those 3 states aren't in play. Florida's in play. Ohio's in play. Pennsylvania is sometimes in play. Virginia's in play. That's where your elections are decided.
And you mentioned the next point they make, and I think that's a really good transition. The next point they make is they try and counter a point that's been made for years from people who are against the Electoral College, who say that the Electoral College causes the candidates to only focus on swing states, right? And the response is, yes, but if you look at California, Texas, and they mentioned one other state, maybe Florida, that those 3 alone could win the election. And so by that, and then they cite like 3 times in history when a entrenched state has been flipped and caused the election flip. They cite George
Florida.
Bush as one of them, and they don't even...
it was a different state that flipped it.
It was Florida that flipped it for George Bush. It was Pennsylvania that flipped it for Trump.
Florida was the last state to go that everybody was on there about. But their argument was there was a traditionally Democratic state that flipped for George Bush, and if that wouldn't have flipped, then
that Florida wouldn't have mattered.
Yeah. You're right.
So they make this argument, but my counter to that is to say, yes, you're absolutely right that they cannot ignore these states. But we also have to look at a statistical argument of this, right? Because while the local state party is going to put on some ads for the candidate in some manner, we know that there is and we're talking about proportionality here, there is an improportional amount of attention given to these other states. And them giving lip service to a big state that they know is entrenched, and then giving promises, hard promises, and making their 60% of their campaign stops in this state that has like a very small population is not the same. And to compare those and say, well, they gave you lip service too, is not a
but if you go to a pure population, where are they going to go? They are going to go where the people are, because they are. You're going to have Republicans spend more time in California than they ever do, because they're not spending any time in California now. They're not going to win a winner take all, but they might win 35-40% of it, and 35-40% of California in a popular vote is worth more than all of Rhode Island.
And I'm not going to argue that. I'm not going to argue that. But we need to also realize that they're not going to spend their time in California. They're going to spend their time in Los Angeles. They're going to spend their time in Houston. They're going to spend their time in the exact population centers, not in the state. Yeah. They're going to go to where the people...
Exactly. They do that now.
Sure. Yeah. They're going to go to where the people are, not because there's a state line there and they need to reach out to these rural areas because they may do some kind of flip based on a rural area in a close call, right? Because that's what they do now, is they focus on big population centers and then hit rural areas where they think there can be a flip. Now they would be forced to go to where people are, period, regardless of state lines.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. But you're going to get a situation where the whole middle of the country is going to be ignored.
You're right.
Nobody's going to Montana. Nobody's going to Wyoming. It's just not going to happen.
But here's the difference, right? The argument is if we switch to popular vote, the rural people get fucked, right? I mean, just point blank.
Yeah.
The difference in this system and that system is if we go to a popular vote, the rural people get fucked. Right now, all but the rural people in 4 states get fucked.
Yeah, I think you may be right. I don't know what the right answer is. Yeah. I don't know that democracy, pure democracy, is the right answer either. I think there has to be a compromise in there, as you mentioned earlier, something to protect the state's authority in there too. Maybe we have a system where there's a popular vote plus there's a vote for the states, where the state legislature can put a vote
or the
in
governor,
there.
whoever,
something in there.
And I wouldn't have a problem with that at all.
We were never supposed to be a mobocracy. Mm-hmm. We just weren't. I don't think the current Electoral College fixes that.
What about this one? Every state has a governor. We just apportion the delegates by the governorship races. We don't even have presidential election.
What?
Well, I guess that would depend on parties. You'd have to have party lines, and unless the governors could cast votes, and it wouldn't depend on parties. Yeah. There's a flaw
there. You're strengthening parties with that. That's a bizarre system. Yeah,
that is. Yeah.
Let's go back to this idea of a tie that we talked about earlier. You want to talk about this beer first?
Yeah, I think we need to.
Before I finish my beer.
I'll go ahead. First on this. I've actually gone back and forth on this. I've had some Hefe-Weissens that were sweeter and clovier than this.
Yeah.
But I think this beer is really balanced in its approach. It's got a light fizz, but it's very carbonated. It's got a high carbonation, but it's light. One sec. Yeah, I mean it's got a smooth start, a smooth finish. It does linger on the tongue a little bit longer than the Dunkel we had, the other German beer we did last week. Overall, I think it's done well. I think it's balanced well. I'm gonna give it a 3-1.
3-1. Okay. You want to go next or me?
I'll let you go.
All right. I think it's an enjoyable beer. I think it's something that if you gave it to me, I would drink it and I wouldn't bitch about it. I'd enjoy it. But I don't think there's anything special about this beer. It's a little too. I think fizzy's the word. It's just it's got a little too much carbonation in there for me. And the fruitiness is a little more than I like. That banana taste is is pretty heavy in this, which you kind of expect in that. But I don't enjoy that so much. It's not my beer. I'm going to go a little lower than that one. I think it's right at a benchmark. It's right there, but it's not anything better than a benchmark. So I'm going to go 2.5.
Okay. So I really enjoy this beer. I really enjoy it as a Hefe-Weiss, and I think it's well made in that respect. I think it has the appropriate amount of body. When I drink a Hefe-Weiss, and I don't want something that's going to be really full, but that is going to be flavorful. This one could stand to have a bit more of the clove flavor, I think. And that's where I'm going to dock it. Everywhere else, I really enjoy this beer.
It is smooth.
It is smooth, to be sure. And I do think that it is well made. I would be really interested to try this one right out of the tap. Fresh off the brew house floor, or I guess not off the floor, preferably.
But I think in Germany it'd be out of the barrel, like after you tap and not the metal keg, but the
My point being, I don't want to drink something off the floor.
Yeah.
But
I'm not saying I never have. But.
Right.
You just shouldn't.
Yes, exactly. So all of that to say, I would be interested to try it fresh off the tap. Because I suspect that maybe time and transportation has lost a little bit of that clove flavor, but I am not going to give it credit for that because I'm not experiencing it here and now. All of that to say, I think this one gets a 2.9.
2.9?
I think it is well made and could have some improvements.
Okay. So 2.9, 2.5. What was yours?
3.1.
3-1.
Okay. I think John's drunk, but, but that's kind of how it happens. All right. So let's get back to this idea of a tie. Something that's never happened. But there was a lot of fear in this last election it was going to. And we know that in the event of a tie, 269, the House of Representatives chooses the president. But, it would be difficult, but the House of Representatives could have a tie.
Right.
What happens then?
I don't remember.
The vice president
right.
becomes the president, and they get to they get to hold off until the House can either make a decision, or if they can't, then the new president gets to appoint. Mm-hmm. But the vice president is selected by the Senate. Mm-hmm. Well, again, there's 100 members in the Senate. Now here, each one gets a vote. Instead of each state getting a vote, each senator gets a vote. So it's a different system for choosing the vice president.
But it's 2 per state. So, I mean, effectively...
It is, but it's still different because one could cancel out the other.
Right.
So you've got something there it's a little bit different than having to come up with one vote for your state. Mm-hmm. Okay? But it's still equal. It's still equal.
I think if I was in Congress and I got to try to make that decision, I would lobby for all of the representatives in Texas to have a rock, paper, scissors contest, and whoever wins gets to pick.
That would be awesome. That would be awesome. Only if the two candidates were
just to make fun of the whole system. Yeah, absolutely. Like if there's one of them that is a literal shit-eating bastard, like...
What if 2 of them are literal shit-eating bastards?
Then maybe we vote for Harambe. I don't know. I'd try really hard to win that one and do something else.
That's interesting though, because the Senate then has the option to vote for a vice president. Now, why do I find this interesting? Well, you could theoretically, if you've got a system like we have had many times in this country, where one party's in charge of the House and the other in charge of the Senate, you could have a president and vice president of different parties.
Mm-hmm. Here.
Could you imagine this? Could you imagine what that would be like as far as
turmoil in the White House?
Good.
It may be good. It may be good. It may be completely inefficient, ineffective, and disastrous.
I don't think it could be, because the vice president really doesn't have any say over the president. It's going to be a voice in his ear that he or she needs
and
he
has
be
a
the
voice
deciding voice in the Senate.
Yes,
and
he has congressional powers.
Yeah,
has a public voice as well. I mean, we can look at, founded or otherwise, the turmoil that came up whenever it came out that Pence was going to be running for president in 2020. And whenever it came out that Pence called him a moron, I think it was, said some nasty things about the president, and caused a lot of, be it temporary, turmoil in the White House.
Well, we've had cases like this before. We've had, in the election of 1796, you had Jefferson versus Adams, and you ended up with a president in one party and a vice president in another. It's going to lead to 4 years of disaster. We had Andrew Jackson and John C. Calhoun, where Andrew Jackson at one point threatens to lead an army into South Carolina and hang the vice president. You know, we've had these issues. And they were in the same damn party. So I can just imagine what it would be like if we had a situation today with President Trump and Vice President Clinton. It would be
God.
It would be rough.
Well, but what we have now, and we see this in the actions taken and what comes out after presidency, is we have two people on the same team that are absolutely willing to collude on the information that comes out and on what's going on inside the White House. Now, I don't know if collusion is necessarily better than complete at each other's throats destruction, But on the other hand, wouldn't it be nice to hear an opinion on what's going on in the White House and the government that wasn't from the same party as the guy who's doing it?
Oh, I don't think it would be much different than what we see now.
I think it would be interesting, and I'd like to see it, but I wonder about the effective and the efficiency of it. There's the one thing about party government, party system, is it does create efficiency in government. Things can get done quickly. Now, most of the time, I don't want shit to get done quickly. But there are times of crisis where getting things done very quickly is essential.
Well, and I would argue that in times of true crisis, usually party lines don't matter.
Look at the Patriot Act.
Yeah, well, sometimes it does. In the modern era, at least, it
Fine.
hasn't. In the modern
I'll
era,
take
it
that.
hasn't. But we had a civil war because party lines mattered at one point. So, it can happen. It's something interesting. So, we've kind of been through the Electoral College and the philosophy behind it, and I think the philosophy was strong. I think the idea of protecting the state's authority and balancing the state's authority and the people's authority was a good theory. I don't think it was mechanically put together correctly.
Right.
So, kind of, where are y'all on this?
Well, I guess I would say that I think it was mechanically put together okay for its time. I think there were some places even then that it had holes, but it made a lot more sense when it was put together. I am fine with talking about something other than a pure democratic system, and there are a lot of people, especially those on the right, who are going to argue the tyranny of democracy and say why that shouldn't be. What I am 100% on board with those who are against the Electoral College is, while I can understand arguments for a wise, small group of people making decisions, while I can understand arguments for, a well-informed and professional group of people choosing or even not going to pure majority for this, the way we have it put together now shows me zero advantage. I cannot see one advantage to this skewed, still popular based, but skewed system where living in one place means it's still a popular vote, but it's a popular vote in which your vote's more important. I can see zero advantage in 2017, and it needs to change.
I agree.
So I come down to having a popularly elected president, having a democratically elected president does not equal us having a democratic system. It is one election out of many elections. We are still a democratic republic with one democratically elected nationwide office. I could compromise and have a state say, as well as a popular election. But I don't think that the Electoral College is effective today.
Okay. All right.
Side note, and maybe there's a little hard shot to do here, but I think it's hilarious how even when so much of the country agrees that a system has become outdated for varying reasons, and not just this one, I think there are other places we could look at this too. How when there's such agreement that a certain system within the Constitution is broken, we adhere so virulently to the words of the Constitution, which were written in an illegal convention.
Yeah.
I don't think it's hilarious at all. I think we should be adhering to the words of the Constitution. It should be hard to change it.
I think the point was...
I understand, but I think that we've got something here that should be changed. But we need to change it the right way.
I'm just saying the guys who wrote it wouldn't have done it.
I agree. They wouldn't have. They just would have seceded and formed something else.
Yeah.
I don't think we're at that point.
Yeah.
So
before we wrap this up, there's one more thing that I want to talk about. Speaking about
Naked ladies.
Later.
Okay.
That's going to be your reward for getting through this next
Yes.
part. Maybe. I guess we'll have to find some. Anyway.
You're the only lady here. We're in trouble here, huh? Come on, baby.
I'll just pull something up on my phone. It'll be fine.
I just realized that the dog is a girl. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
Hey,
and she's naked.
And she's naked.
So anyway, talking about constitutionality and all of this and kind of this attitude of, well, they would just secede and change, do something else. What do we think of, and I don't remember the name of the organization. I think their initials are LPN or LNP or something like that. The organization that is trying to get a coalition of states together to sign a contract saying that they would cast their electoral votes for whoever is elected popularly on a nationwide basis, and kind of making an end run around the Constitution and around the Electoral College to kind of force us into going with the popular vote.
I see some issues with it.
Yeah.
I like the general idea, I like the route they're taking, and I don't want to knock them for doing it. I think they're making a good attempt at something. But, one of the big issues I see with it
They're at like 165 already.
Yeah. One of the big issues I see with it is that these votes, while cast for a national candidate, are counted at a state level. So this requires various states putting a great deal of trust in each other to report accurate numbers. We've seen the turmoil that can come out of even one state being really close. Imagine if the national numbers were coming down really close and a red state had to count and submit the vote totals, and a few hundred votes are going to sway the election one way or the other.
I don't have to imagine it's happened.
Right. The pressure that's going to be on that predominantly controlled by one party state to fudge numbers, and we know fudge numbers have come across.
Historian in me has to come out here. 1876, we had Samuel Tilden versus Rutherford B. Hayes, and Samuel Tilden won the popular vote. He had been declared the winner. Rutherford B. Hayes had sent him a letter congratulating him, and his campaign advisor came to him and said, "Hold off, Rutherford. I sent a telegram to Florida." And the telegram said, this is word for word, the telegram said, "Can you hold Florida?" Florida had already been called for Samuel Tilden. But he said that was the deciding factor. Whatever way Florida went was going to determine. Said, "Can you hold Florida?" And the political operative there in Florida said Florida will hold in the Electoral College. Rutherford B. Hayes pulled it back out. And when the Electoral College came and voted, Florida voted opposite of the way that the popular vote was, and Rutherford B. Hayes became president. So it's happened. It's something that has actually happened. Perfectly legal, by the way. Mm-hmm. Some would argue in 2000 a similar thing happened when the Secretary of State certified the election before the recount was over, and George Bush became president. You know, it has happened. We don't have to imagine it. It's
So
always
We can
Florida.
just like kick him off.
So,
They cause problems.
Maybe as part of that, in order to fix that, they all have to keep their vote numbers sealed and reveal them at the same time when everybody says, I have my numbers, I have my numbers, I have my numbers. Maybe national needs to take over kind of that vote. I don't know the answer, but I see a problem, is what I'm saying.
I wonder how you stop a state legislature from saying, we don't care what that says, we're certifying for this candidate. Because they could.
Yeah, well, you talk about a contract. The best thing we have about contracts, or the best example we have of contracts between states, is treaties. But we can't form treaties between states because we're part of a union. So,
and in fact, the Supreme Court has ruled that contracts can't be made between states. That
Right.
They you can make agreements.
Yeah.
But you can't make contracts because anything by law that's interstate is governed by the federal government.
and it's by
Right.
handshake of one administration to another.
Yeah.
And whenever administration changes, the next one is not bound.
Not bound
The first
by it.
one was only bound by honor, really.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
second one is definitely not even.
Yeah. So it's scary.
I like that there's an effort being made. I'm not going to knock that, but there's some serious holes in the theory.
We need a 28th Amendment for this one.
Yeah.
We really do. The only way to solve this problem is through amendment. And that's bizarre for me because I always vote no to amendments because I think we have enough. But
Well, that's the
but
national
that's-
level.
Well, I understand. But I've been in Texas where we have
Yeah.
400 plus amendments.
500 now.
Is it 500 now?
I think it's about to break 600.
I think we need to follow in the footsteps of our great founding fathers and have a con.
I'm with you. I can can you, right?
Yes.
Great episode. Go listen to that one. All right. Are we done with this episode?
I think we are.
I think we have beat this horse until it's...
And I'm sure in a year we will come back and talk about the Electoral College again.
Probably.
Because that's what happens.
It's a
'Cause it'll
pretty
still be
common thing.
stupid.
It'll still be stupid unless
And
you
then we'll
people
have-
get out there and fix it.
And then we'll have a party whenever it gets changed.
A drunken Greek orgy.
Absolutely. Is there
Absolutely.
any other kind?
Can we do a drunken American orgy? The American thing changed.
I want to do a Greek orgy.
Okay.
Greek style
I'm just
American
saying,
orgy.
I'm wearing a toga. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Greek style American orgy. It'll be
All
fun.
right, so
All right.
this beer was
With
good.
gyros
This
and everything.
topic
Beer was
was good.
Yes.
I had a really good time with this. John, if somebody likes this show a whole lot and wants to make sure that we stay on the air, what can they do?
Well, the first thing and the easiest thing they can do is reach down right now and hit that like, that thumbs up, that heart, whatever is on your particular podcast. After you're done with that, I know you want to hear more, so if you're not subscribed already, hurry up and subscribe. Do it now, you'll forget tomorrow. After you're done with all that, if you want to see how you can get involved to get some special listener perks, go to our Patreon, patreon.com/sixpackphilosophy, and you can be part of the inner six-pack philosophy circle.
You can get your koozie on the koozie club.
Can it be the inner
Thank
barrel?
you, Tommy. He knows who we're talking about. Thank you,
Yes.
Tommy.
Yes, absolutely. And get back to me. I sent you a message on Patreon.
Yeah. What if you want this great shirt? We have this six-pack philosopher shirt with our logo on the back of it. I'm not going to turn around now because you'll stare at my butt. But
That was not effective.
That was not effective at all. But you can get this on.
teespring.com/sixpackphilosophy. So we launched these at first on a special campaign. We got enough traction. They sold. They're doing well. So we put them in our permanent shop.
Yeah, people are asking about it,
Yeah.
so we put it out there for you.
teespring.com/sixpackphilosophy. We're also in the near future, as soon as we change our branding, that's happening at the New Year's. We are
January
going to be
1.
releasing some
I'm
new...
so excited.
Yeah.
The new brand is so cool.
Yeah.
Yep, you're gonna have to wait to see it though. We released a few hints to our Patreon though, so if you want to know what you can get in on if you join our Patreon, that's a little bit of something you can get on.
Yeah.
But we're going to have some new material coming out along with the branding change. So right now we only have this series, but we have some new stuff coming up soon. So
We do.
teespring.com/sixpackphilosophy if you want some merch.
Absolutely. And
And if you go to the Patreon, we are releasing coupon codes month to month for the merch, so that will let you get the merch for cheaper.
Yeah.
In fact, I think the last coupon code
Was 20% off.
it was, and if you ordered a hoodie, if you wanted a hoodie, you actually saved money that month by joining the Patreon.
That's right.
And then ordering the hoodie
Yeah.
with a coupon code. We didn't realize that when we did it, but you know what?
Who cares?
We put it out there, so
Yeah.
we're going to honor it. And you know what? I'm grateful for all the patrons who've been supporting us.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you get the cheaper hoodie.
That's
Yeah.
right. That is so cool. That is so cool.
All right. So with that, thank you guys so much for tuning in. As always, it's been a joy, and we hope you guys have had fun with it too. Hit us up on whatever, podcast platform, website, social media. Let us know what you thought about the episode.
Stitcher, iTunes.
Yeah, all the things.
2 cans with a string attached between the two.
That'll only get to
Smoke
Mike.
signals.
Still only get to Mike. But hit us up. Let us know. Did we miss something about the Electoral College? Do you have a
Yes.
different opinion? I'm sure we did. And I'm sure they do. So anyway, thank you guys so much for tuning in. We hope you've enjoyed. And I guess with that, we're out of here. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
That was bad. Let's try it again.
It's because the beer
It's
is...
because there's beer in it.
Yeah.
Hey,
It
see y'all
changes the
later.
resonant frequency. It's a thing.
Six-pack philosophy can be used to treat closed-mindedness, straight-ticket voting, and faulty reasoning. Side effects of six-pack philosophy may include questioning the status quo, thinking for oneself, and electile dysfunction. Ask your bartender if six-pack philosophy is right for you. And as always, keep on drinking and thinking. This has been Six-Pack Philosophy.